Hello and welcome. It's Monday afternoon in India and Monday morning in Europe. And at the beginning of the week, we are going to discuss an important subject that is now occupying the minds of lawmakers in Europe. As most of you are aware, perhaps, that the European Parliament last week voted to freeze discussions on an investment deal with China, which was signed with much fanfare in December 2020. Which seems to be a retaliatory move for sanctions that the some of the EU officials, academics, and researchers were imposed by China, the sanctions on them. And therefore, the European Parliament has now decided to keep the investment deal on hold until China lifts the sanctions and, of course, gives assurances that this will not be repeated. In fact, the resolution in the European Parliament was passed with overwhelming majority. 599 members of European Parliament voted in favor of the resolution. Only 30 voted against it, while 58 were absent. So that's a major setback for China, which was looking for a complete, I would say, inroads into Europe on the trade front. Because it has an ongoing battle with the United States as far as trade is concerned. And therefore, perhaps this should come as a setback, although China has reacted angrily and said that it can't be double standards applied here. But we'll see what happens going forward. But to discuss all that and why European Union is hesitant on China at the moment, I have a distinguished scholar joining me from Vienna. An old friend, Velina Tchakarova, who is the director of the Austrian Institute of Security Policy, based in Vienna. Welcome, Velina, and good morning.
Hello, and thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure being your guest and discussing the most strategic issues with you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining. So let me start with the first question that I have. What prompted the European Union, you think, to go back on what seemed to be a very lucrative deal with China? It doesn't seem to be business as usual. What went wrong, really?
When it comes to the relations with China, we cannot talk about business as usual. Let's outline very shortly the geo-economic context. The European Union is the most important trading partner of China. So China is actually the most important trading. Let's put it on that way. It's on its way to becoming the most important trading partner of the European Union. So obviously there was a need to settle and institutionalize this relationship. It was clearly, on its way since 2013. The negotiations on investment deal were taking place, and last year during the German presidency, achieving a deal with China was, so to say, the pearl, was the cherry in terms of the German agenda. But the deal, coming to a deal with China, was quite of a surprise for most of the European, community, the experts, and even the stakeholders. So it was not, it was not a unilateral decision. It was quite controversial, and the signs that there will be, huge debate on whether to ratify the deal were also on the table. So the timing of this deal, December 30, 2020, was pretty obvious that there was a political push, and there is no secret that it was Germany's political push to achieve a deal with China, but it was absolutely expected that there will be a debate within the European Parliament, and the developments in the first quarter of this year basically escalated the process. So these sanctions that the European Union put on four, I want to stress, four persons from China related to forced labor and violation of human rights in the Chinese province Xinjiang were reciprocated in a disproportionate manner. And this was actually the reason why the reaction, the expected reaction in the European Parliament was such, was so unequivocally clear that there won't be a ratification of this deal for sure.
I'm sure it's come as a shock to China because they were really banking on this. And of course, the long negotiations for almost 7 years should have now given them the advantage that they wanted. There are interesting questions here. Some audience, despite this being an afternoon program in India and early morning in Europe, there are some questions here, and you can see one of the questions here. What do you think about India now? Because we are talking about China. Ivan Harriman, perhaps he knows you or you know him. He's asked you this question: what will be the biggest roadblock to EU-India free trade agreement? Because there was the historical summit between India and the European Union with so many leaders attending the summit with Prime Minister Modi. Do you think this can work as an alternative, or China-European Union relation and European Union-India relations are mutually exclusive?
So, as you said, China miscalculated hugely on the European Union reaction following the sanctions, the Chinese sanctions. And one of the consequences was, in fact, the European Union-India summit on May 8th, which led to the relaunch of the negotiations on a free trade agreement between the European Union and India. And let me just clarify that the free trade agreement is much higher in terms of, of the comprehensiveness than an investment deal. And it also led to, prior to the summit, to a conclusion on the side of the European Council, to adoption on the side of the European Council of Indo-Pacific strategy. And there is now actually the case that there is a strategic necessity for the European Union to diversify its relations in the Indo-Pacific region. So there will be, the focus is clearly being put on India as this, epicenter and regional rival, but also a regional counterweight to Chinese influence in a region that is so important for European trade, because more than 90% of the European trade still takes place via maritime routes. And these are the same maritime routes in the Indian Oceans that also link to the old continent, to Europe, and are very important in security terms for, for the conduct of trade. So yes, my expectation is that the relations with India will not only improve, but will now rapidly get institutionalized. So this process will be speeded up, and it will affect other areas. Take diversification of supply chains away from China, moving towards India, take connectivity strategy. That means how to actually capitalize on the fourth industrial revolution and create actually synergies in the field of digitalization, where there is certainly a central role for India. And then, of course, the political capital that you can actually draw from intensifying the relations with New Delhi while putting the relations with Beijing on hold.
Absolutely. I think it is the time of the pivot, European nations pivoting towards Indo-Pacific and specifically to India. And we'll have to wait and watch how this goes forward and how quickly this can be implemented. But coming back to the Chinese European Parliament or European nations friction, let me say, put it that way. What do you expect the Chinese to do? I mean, would there be retaliatory moves on tariff? Would there be, of course, there has been a great, what should I say, a welcome across the spectrum about how the European Parliament put this on hold. But the Chinese have reacted predictably. Do you expect some kind of a retaliatory action, if not in terms of trade tariff barriers or in terms of trade sanctions, but in terms of cyber attacks, perhaps on European entities and European banks or European financial institutions? Is that something that Europe should be worried about?
Generally, the COVID-19 pandemic was an eye-opener when it comes to actually the influence of countries such as China and Russia on European soil. So whether this kind of attacks or measures, active measures will be intensified, they will be certainly intensified in terms of global power competition. So it's not directly linked to the deteriorating situation between the European Union and China, but we have to look at them in a much broader context. What I think is going to happen right now, at least for the next 1 year, is that there is on the side of the European member states and European institutions a sort of a political vacuum, because Germany, which has been the front runner to institutionalize the relations with China, by including also the European institutions, because let's clarify for our viewers and listeners that the European decision-making process is a little bit more complicated than one can imagine if you are viewing it from India. Because it's a twofold process. On the one side, you have the European Union institutions. They often can play a bad cop role. For instance, when it comes to the European Commission, which is in charge for for this kind of deals, trade deals, which is also a good thing because most of the European member states, most of the European states are very small and have a very limited scope of impact. So that means that delegating this kind of competences to one actor, institutional actor, is in this case a good thing to do. Let me also remind you that it was the European Commission that came out with this strategic outlook on China in 2019, prior to the pandemic. And this is where, for the very first time, the relations with China were set in a framework, in a threefold framework. So China was described not just as a partner, but also as a competitor, economic competitor, and as a strategic rival. So basically, three different areas were identified for the future relations with China. Now, why did I say political vacuum? It's because Germany, the frontrunner of the institutionalization of this relationship, is facing elections in September, and France will be facing elections next year. So the French-German engine of the European project, of the European Union project, is going to be more or less concerned with its own domestic issues. And that, of course, also means that the European institutions will have to, basically catch up with the political processes in the most important member states now that the UK is out of the European Union. I expect no formal institutionalization, so to sum it up, of the bilateral relations in this period. Once the elections are over, so this cycle is over, we have to wait and see what the new political establishment and leadership will be in these two countries, because this is this is the, so to say, the trigger for the next phase in the relations.
I can see that. In fact, you already preempted the question that Tonchev Plemen had, where he had spoken about what would happen in the upcoming German elections and the possible end of Merkel era. How is it going to affect? You already answered that. In fact, there is one more question on that. Maybe we'll take that and then move forward. Mehul Lad says, how divergent are the EU with respect to China and Indo-Pacific? And could it have policy paralysis within the European Union. Is that something that one should look at, or the Chinese are looking at?
They are certainly closely observing these processes here in Europe. And like I said, I don't see that there will be now a strong political language coming from Beijing when it comes to European decision makers. So there will be damage control, more or less. This is my expectation. And let me also stress that, China's soft power projection has become stronger in the last 15, 16 months following the COVID-19 pandemic. But when it comes to the European Union, once again, I have to stress that we are dealing with very different countries within this construct. So that means that China does not have a coherent approach towards all of them, but it actually develops its measures and its political leverage based on the interests within each of these countries. So we have actually a report coming from the European think tanks network on China, ETNC report. It's available for everyone as a PDF. And Plamen Tonchev, who actually asked the question, is a colleague of mine who represents Greece within this think tank network. And according to the last report by the ETNC network, the countries within the European Union were actually listed in 4 groups. So you have a group where Austria belongs, but also countries such as Portugal or Hungary, where China does not really appeal to, to actively project its soft power. So it keeps a low profile. But then again, you have countries such as Greece or Italy, where China has very strong geoeconomic interests. And the approach there is to actually, is actually approach towards damage containment. So to create a positive picture. And then you have countries such as Germany or the Netherlands or Spain, where China is clearly becoming, so the image of China is clearly becoming less favorable. And Beijing is struggling with this growing vigilance. And then you have countries such as Sweden and France, where soft power by China is in clearly in a state of free fall.
That's right. I think very well put, Velina Tchakarova. Thank you for your time and your insights. A very nuanced take on what has happened last week when the Chinese got a rude shock where the investment deal was put on hold. I think for our viewers, this was one of the most interesting takes. And as usual, pleasure talking to you, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. And Europe is with India in these difficult times, and we are providing a lot of help through our civil mechanism. And I wish to extend my warmest greets to all Indians and all people who are actually now listening and watching. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Velina. Thank you very much, and stay safe. Stay vaccinated if you haven't already got vaccinated. But thank you very much once again for your time. So keep tuning in to StratNews Global. All of you know what our social media handles are. Keep sending the feedback and comments, and of course, join us live whenever we do these live programs. Today we had in the afternoon, on a Monday afternoon, we had at least 10 people commenting and asking questions, which is a very encouraging sign for us. So do keep tuning into StratNews Global, and we'll come back with more for you. Until the next time, it's goodbye.